legislation.
I call the honourable member Catherine Delahunty. Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker. Tēnā koutou te whare paramata ko tēnei rā. I would like to start my speech on this bill with two quotes. One is a traditional tangata whenua whakatauaki. Whatu naru naru te tangata, toi tū te whenua. People perish, but the land remains. However, in the case of this bill, after it goes through, some of the land may not remain. And the other quote I would like is from the miners of Waihi in 1912, inspired by the funeral of Frederick Evans. If blood be the price of your cursed wealth, good God, we have bought it fair. The cursed wealth referred to is the wealth of large companies, especially overseas ones, in their exploitation of both people and the environment. And the Crown Minerals Act, as it will be, is set up to facilitate both of those above all else. We hear about Taranaki. We hear how wonderful it's going. We hear about the West Coast. What we see in those communities, in my community, is two-tier economies. Economies where sections of the community are benefiting and other sections are being left behind. And I'll refer to that later in this corridor. However, back to the cursed wealth. And there is only one substantive redeeming feature of this bill, and that is the SOP from Part 1. That includes the recommendations of the Pike River Commission, because if nothing else, at least we can support the lives of workers, and the Greens support that SOP. However, the rest of the bill is mainly a declaration of war challenged by the public at the Select Committee. The Minister is promoter of mining, not as a regulator. The joint ministerial decision-making over the access to DOC's land, and there was a huge number of submissions on that issue. The only change was to make this for significant issues. Well, any application on DOC land has significance to people. The public notification issues, the extensions to exploration licences, the tokenism towards Te Treaty rights via iwi engagement reports that have no proper framework or recognition of any kind of veto. The fact that coal is a fossil fuel, oil is a fossil fuel, and we need to transition away from this dependency on these fuels to a sustainable and renewable economy. Then there's the order in councils that undermine the DOC Minister. The undermining of the Conservation Minister throughout this bill is a very, very serious matter, and the orders in council mean that instead of the Minister having rights over designations, it will go straight to Cabinet, and we know what happens there under this government. The net economic benefit is the wrong criteria, because decision-making cannot be just about economic benefit. It needs to be about a net total benefit, including the environment, because no environment, no economy. And then there is the legendary supplementary order paper number 205, the Anadarko clause. The lock up the defenders of the marine environment if they go anywhere near an oil rig or oil vessel. Now opposed, I think, by 79% of people recently surveyed, and also potentially a breach of the Bill of Rights, and I'm also dubious that the Bill of Rights has been consulted properly on this bill. Forget about rights in international water. Let's breach any kind of protocol and jam this SOP into the bill at the last moment. It is very, very sad to see the government following an appalling process, ignoring the Select Committee, which we sat on, and despite some of the bright young faces on the government benches, this is forcing an outdated, authoritarian, dictatorial, knee-jerk response against Te Whānau Apanui and Greenpeace because they won, which is not only unfair, but it's ridiculous, and it has made the government has now made the enemy of some very middle-of-the-road citizens who may not want to go out in the water themselves, but don't believe that this is the kind of behaviour they would expect from a government, or that it's a recognition of people's legal and human rights. Also, there was my supplementary order paper that was voted down, which would have stopped any confusion about Schedule 4. It would have stopped prospecting, exploration and mining in Schedule 4, and it would have clarified to all parties that no mining promises made to the public by this government were actually fulfilled. This bill further erodes the integrity of Schedule 4 by changing the definition of minimum impact activities, and according to the Minister, under questions from me last week, it will allow for drilling for exploration but not for mining. The Minister doesn't understand mineral exploration. You don't drill for exploration, you drill so that you can mine. And then when you've got your permit, because you've done your exploration drilling, you mine it, you don't drill it. Never mind, Minister, you'll catch up. And you will hear from the public on this matter. So there is a simple approach to Schedule 4 that this bill should be supporting. Leave it alone. That's what the people marched for, that's what they asked for, and that's what should happen. Now, another part of this bill refers to a very controversial decision which has been in front of the courts. And yesterday, I stood on the Denniston Plateau. I stood there with an astonishing vista of mountain and ocean, an astonishing and delicate array of native plants and geology. And I'll hold it up for the benefit of the House. There's me yesterday on the Denniston Plateau in front of this astonishing array of national treasures. And if any of you have been to the Burren in Ireland, which is a national treasure in Ireland, you'd know that there's a similar feeling there, a feeling of absolute diversity, a feeling of absolute beauty, and a feeling of absolute specialness, which the Irish are capitalising for their economy, but we're about to destroy. This includes, of course, the kiwi, our national bird. Well, why not mine it? It's only a kiwi. The gecko and the giant snail. And in fact, a wonderful large kura that I found, I took a photograph of in a crystal clear piece of water up on the Denniston Plateau, right in the area where Bathurst proposed their open cast mine. And some things are not compatible, Mr. Speaker. You can't rehabilitate after you've open cast mined an area. There will not be any of these species left. I also stood in the museum to honour past miners as a great-grandchild of a mining family who stayed poor until my family left the industry. Like so many miners' families, poverty and the cycle of poverty, the boom and bust remains. But open cast mining on the scale proposed by Bathurst on the Denniston Plateau is supported by a provision of this bill which will allow joint decision-making by ministers being retroactive in effect towards Denniston, and this cannot be mitigated. There may be 200 or so jobs for 5 years, and then the West Coast will be back to the boom and bust cycle of which the collapse of solid energy is so typical. The Mayor of Reefton came to the Select Committee and asked us when there would be a genuine regional and infrastructure payoff from all this mining in his area. And he stated that he loves digging up gold and coal, but when would he get that sustained benefit for his community? Because it wasn't happening. The answer, Mr. Mayor, is never. It's not about local sustainability. Times have changed, but still the same pattern for mining communities is all over the world. It's a boom, it's a bust. Whether it's Waihi, whether it's Reefton, whether it's Westport, it's a boom and then it's a bust. In the meantime, we bust things that cannot be fixed, like the Denniston Plateau. However, on a more positive note, times have changed. The idea of green coke from wood chips producing green steel is still a new idea beneath our horizon, but is a growing idea. Humans are endlessly creative. We can find other things, other methodologies, other economies than destroying places like the Denniston Plateau. That should be part of a national park, not a net economic gain as it's described. It's an unforgivable devastation, and there will be national resistance. There will be positive and celebratory national resistance to oil drilling in the ocean. There will be positive and celebratory national resistance to the destruction of the climate and to biodiversity and to communities who deserve so much better, because there are huge opportunities in places like Denniston for wonderful things to happen. The government needs to wake up with this bill, because the government is losing the last shreds of its credibility as a just government or a government with any kind of vision. And this bill represents government at its worst, building in bias and legislating for privilege instead of supporting an economy that's sustainable. When the people of this country marched in the streets, they marched because we want to love and protect our special places. We want the integrity of our oceans to remain, and we know that we can create employment that is sustainable and that is healthy for future generations without destroying these very important places, let alone taking away the basic rights of citizens to non-violent protest. The failure of imagination in this bill is extreme, and it is very, very disappointing to see it go through. And there are so few. There are some technical amendments that will tidy up some of the frameworks, some of the permitting regimes, but in the end, this bill has come down squarely and fairly on the side of injustice, on the side of the miners, who want to take our resources and use them for the short term, not for the long-term vision of our communities. Stand with us on the Denison Plateau, because we will be standing there, and see what it means to actually believe in the sustainability of our environment. Kia ora, Mr. Speaker.
Kia ora. I call the Honourable Philip Heatley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.